Welcome to Healing Solidarity Embodying Change, the second conference about reimagining international development. I'm Marianne Clement, a feminist writer, facilitator, activist and coach, and I'm the initiator of Healing Solidarity. In this conversation, Ponce Mafete talks with Marai Larasi and Neha Kagal about decolonising development, the practice of intersectionality, and the fundamental change our sector needs. This is a powerful and inspiring conversation, and I hope you'll really enjoy listening to it.
So thank you both of you for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited about this conversation. But before we start, I'd like to give a brief introduction to both our speakers. So first of all, Marai, a Black feminist activist advocate and all-round rebel. Welcome and lovely to have you on this call. And to Neha, a Black feminist activist researcher who worked at the intersection of violence against women and girls and women's economic empowerment. So welcome to you both, and thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to the next few minutes of this conversation.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting us to be a part of this process.
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So perhaps to get us started, could you just tell us a little bit, both of you, about, sort of who you are, why this issue matters to you, why you do the work you do?
Sure, cool. So Neha, we're going to tag team a bit. So
Perfect.
Neha, you're right with me just kicking us off? And then...
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Please do.
So I've been working in the area of ending violence against women and girls for around 25 years. My most recent organizational role was at an organization, an NGO here on these islands, i.e. the United Kingdom, called Imkan. And Imkan's a Black feminist organization that works specifically around violence against Black women and girls, women that have been minoritized on the basis of ethnicity. So women whose journeys originate in the global South, women who are called BME, Black and minority ethnic, but in fact are the global majority. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so coming from I suppose I ended up working at Imkan because for me, the personal is the political. And I know that's a bit of a kind of old feminist expression, but for me it still rings true in the sense that I do this work because my liberation is directly connected to the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. And Imkan as an organization really spoke to me. Like the organization's work was a personal, political, intellectual fit. And so I worked at Imkan in 2009 to around May, June this year. And now I work as an independent kind of thinker, activist, consultant, and so forth. And I'll talk a little bit more as we go on about working from a Black feminist perspective, because for me, this work is absolutely violence against women and girls work in the sense that it's gender justice work, but it's gender justice work which is gender is racialized, right? And gender always intersects with other aspects of who we are. And so I needed to, my work is necessarily driven by an intersectional analysis and by those intersections. So over to Neha.
Thanks, Marai. I got into this work in my early 20s when I was in social work school. And I began working with, at that point, various unions, trade unions of different women in the informal economy, women working in incredibly precarious working conditions, mostly Dalit women. I think the most profound kind of experience was working with a trade union of waste pickers, who are women who pick garbage. And it was a feminist union of almost 10,000 waste pickers in Pune in India. And the union in and of itself worked at the intersection of a number of issues, so gender, caste, class, educational attainment, geographical location. There were lots of intersections. And at that point, I didn't understand my work in this way. It was simply livelihoods advocacy. How do you ensure that the work that waste speakers are doing, they have a right to do that work. They have a right to work in conditions that are safe. And so it was more right to livelihoods kind of work. And I loved it, and it, I think, created this basis for, or this foundation for understanding how change happens, and when does change happen and when does it not happen. But it was only when I came to the UK to do my PhD it was a similar issue regarding informal workers coming together. But it was when I joined IMCAN that I think it really, the penny dropped, in a sense that being a Black feminist raised in the global South and now located in the global North, and by virtue of that being minoritized in a particular way, that the experience really came home. And I think I began to understand the intersecting oppressions that I was facing in a very tangible, real, intimate way. And it was hard. It was the privilege that I held in terms of my caste and class position in India. It's not like they went away, but they definitely didn't have the same sort of clout that they did there. And I did not have the same sort of advantages that I had drawn on. I understood it in an intellectual way, I think, in India, but coming here, it really brought it back home. And that's where Marai and I met in IMCAN. And so, yeah, that's I don't know if that's answered the question, but that's the beginning of a conversation, I guess, a much longer conversation about what happens when you, dislocated like that.
Yeah, both really interesting. And I think what struck me was there was something about not just the work that you do, but how you situate yourselves and your own life experiences and those of your comrades almost in that conversation. And I think perhaps picking up on the references and the work that you mentioned around violence against women and girls, could you talk a little bit about that work, and particularly in the specialist Black feminist sector in which you both work?
Sure. And again, we'll tag team a bit, and I think there are ways that Neha can maybe draw on work that we've done outside of the UK. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about how some of this is positioned on these islands. So if you're doing violence against women and girls work here, then the overarching framework, if it happens to be a feminist framework, is very much a white Eurocentric framing, where gender is presented, or a version of gender that is also about female body, a very specific version of the thing, is put forward as a thing that we need to think about, a version of womanness that in many ways actually doesn't include whole groups of us. And so organizations like IMCAN really exist to reaffirm the nothing about us without us position. So really to actually, ensure that the voices of us as Black women, as women of color, as minoritized global majority women are actually centered in our own struggles. And that covers everything from strategic advocacy, so the conversations that we have relating to the public policy landscape, to the whole, the fight, and I say a fight because I want to put it in pretty language, but it is really a fight, for specialist services that are by and for Black women, women of color. And if I start with the specialist services, because that's really where the work came from. The work came from the struggle that was rooted in the establishment of organizations like OWAD, Organization of Women of, African and Asian Descent, kind of back in the day, that kind of collective, challenging, often tense, difficult construction of space. And, you know, sisters like Stella Dadsey, you know, After Bra, Amrit Wilson, women like that who really knew that we needed to assert our right to have space on these islands, and really draw on that thing of, you know, we're here because you were there. We can't talk about our presence here without talking about issues such as colonization. We can't talk about violence against us without talking about the violence of the state. And services really came from that place of, we need to be able to do this in ways that are appropriate to us, that are not simply about about homogenous ideas of culture and reductive ideas of culture, that really recognize absolutely the importance of cultural nuance, but most critically are saying we assert our right to actually establish spaces that are designed by us. There's very much something about us wanting to work in ways where we don't have to explain our blackness, white women. We don't have to have a conversation about, we don't have to be in a situation of defending our communities and, you know, defending and challenging this notion of the, you know, excessively patriarchal black male in whatever version he presents, and how we wanted to have conversations with each other and seek solutions with each other, you know, where services were directly linked to resistance, right? And so that's the backdrop, which is kind of 40 odd years into, I suppose, if we think about when movement became sector. So 40 odd years of that work, which very often in the broader feminist imagination, we end up being a footnote, right? But we've been here doing the work with each other, and we've also been doing the work, if you like, in mainstream feminist struggles. And you know, and services have been set up all across the islands by women, African descendant women, so African Caribbean women, African women, South Asian women, Southeast Asian women, you know, and so forth. And IMCAN really came from, so IMCAN is 20 years into its journey. And IMCAN really came from the need to coalesce, the need to come together, to have a stronger, unified, collective voice that was a strategic advocacy voice, because women delivering services on a day-to-day basis, A, knackered, B, sometimes the space to think, to process what the strategic advocacy soundbite should be, you know, isn't always easy. The whole thing around time for research, time for, you know, kind of making the arguments about why, you know, when we're in a fight for our existence, making the arguments around why we need to be here. And so that space of, if you like, Black feminist resistance has been directly linked to everything from whether we're talking about going on the street once a year with Million Women Rise, to whether we're talking about the running of a service in Newcastle or in East London, to whether we're talking about having a conversation with a civil servant or a politician about who we are and what we do. And that's what the work has looked like here. And there's a huge kind of breadth and depth of this work that really isn't simply about women like Neha and myself, but really is about hundreds of women that have been doing this over the decades and have been doing this in different ways. And so we simply happen to be the two women that you're having the conversation with right now, but we're only here because our sisters continue to hold the line around the direct provision of services to us as survivors, and but also, you know, holding the line around the resistance. You know, there is a front line. There is a front line, which sometimes is the street, but there is also an intellectual front line and an advocacy front line that many of us have had to continue to hold in order to keep us safe, but also work towards their liberation. So that's the UK bit. No,
Thank you.
the other side of it.
Thanks, Marai. That's great context. I think I'd probably speak a little bit about the work we did when I was at IMCAN, when Marai and I were both at IMCAN, and this was work done internationally in the Western Balkans and Turkey. So it was in 7 countries in the Western Balkans, as well as Turkey, and it was essentially a piece of research. It started off as a piece of research to understand what kinds of services existed, what kind of violence against women and girls services existed, but particularly for minoritized women. So in every country, there were particular groups of minoritized women that we worked with. They could be disabled women in certain countries, Roma women, Egyptian or Somali women, lesbian women, refugee women, rural women, so different groups. And what was quite interesting, I mean, I'll pick up probably 1 or 2 things, but I think conceptually it was interesting because this piece allowed us to really expand current understandings of violence against women and girls. It allowed us to push the boundaries. And I mean, when I say it allowed us to push the boundaries, it allowed us to have the legitimacy because we were funded to do a piece of work, to say what women have been saying for decades, essentially. So when Roma women have been saying, well, we need money and we get money for violence against women and girls, but it doesn't allow us to run these cooperatives that we run, which are really important because women have then access to livelihood, they have access to income. And that's part of our Vogue work. You can't separate it. Doing Vogue work is not only having a refuge space for women. So I think what it allowed, it was, I think of it as an experience where we had the real honor of meeting some tremendous activists working in really hard, bleak conditions. And like Marai said, maintaining that line, constantly maintaining that line. And what we did was try and I guess methodologically, we put a lot of effort into giving ourselves time to go and find out who these organizations were. Many of them are not on the radar of big donors or country partners. So who are these small organizations? Who are these small disruptive organizations doing incredible work? How do we find them? Sometimes there were, organizations started by 1 person, 2 people. We went in their like over their kitchen table. So how do we seek out these organizations? How do we build trust? How do we we're constantly aware that IMCAN is located in London. We may be Black feminists with roots in the South, but we come from a position of being located in London. And what does that mean in us having the power or the power to say something? What do we say? Who says it? And how do we ensure that the voices of minoritized women are central to this process? How does the research actually build around what women are saying? And it was hard for a number of reasons, because I guess with funders and donors, it's hard to explain why even creating a space for organizations like this across 7 countries to come together, women who've never met each other before but are doing similar work in different parts of the world, to come together and just be together in that space, that kind of solidarity. You can't quantify it, you can't, it's, but that's central to the work. So for us to hold that line and say, well, this is what we're going to do, and we're not moving. You've asked IMCAN to come in, and if you ask IMCAN to come in, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. I think that was quite a profound and
Yeah, interesting. Because in what you've both just shared, you talked a lot about diverse groups under this broader umbrella of sort of feminist organizations or organizations that were responding to violence against women and girls. And it would be interesting to hear a bit from you about how you define intersectionality, almost at its most basic, because it is a term that you hear everywhere now, sometimes used in contexts where you're like, I'm not entirely sure that was how it is actually defined. So perhaps hearing from you about what intersectionality means for you would be really interesting.
Sure. So I'd say Kimberly Crenshaw gave us the language, in the sense that, you know, in '89, when Crenshaw came up with the term intersectionality, I want to believe that all over the world, you know, Black women, women of color went, well, thank you for the conceptual clarity, right? And so first things first, there is a way that I become deeply offended when primarily white people tell me that intersectionality is an abstract term, because or it's this theoretical thing that's not connected to anything. Because, you know, Black feminists, indigenous feminists, feminists of color have been theorizing about our experiences and or intersecting, you know, the different ways that we are subjugated at the intersections for centuries. Crenshaw gave us the term, but that's what, and expanded the thinking in terms of legal theory and so forth, and gave us a term that would be incredibly useful in so many ways. But this is coming out of our lived experiences. And so for me, the first thing to do is to actually say that it's really, this is rooted in our histories and our lived experiences. And so for me, this is actually about how we, as Crenshaw talks about, how we address what's happening in the point of the car crash. So where you have the intersection, if we think of different axes of oppression, and we think about race as one axis, and we think about gender as one axis, and, you know, we could think about sexuality, disability, you know, we could think about class status, caste status, and so forth. I think one of the things that this calls us to do is to look at what is happening if you have race intersecting with gender, right? And, or if you have race intersecting with gender with sexuality. And I think there's a magic to that, because what it does is it allows us to frame our experiences, but it also allows us to say, like I said recently at a conference in Iceland, if people are showing off and saying they're doing gender justice brilliantly and they're not thinking about race, then you're not doing gender justice brilliantly, right? Because our experiences of gender discrimination are always racialized. And they're racialized, and if you're white, they happen to be racialized in the sense that gives you privilege and that gives you protection. And if you're Black, what it does is it means that you are exposed to a certain type of subjugation. And of course, within that, we know we've got spectrums. You know, you have, you know, access that's based on caste and location and class and shade and all that. So it's not like Black is this homogenous thing. It's complicated. But being able to actually at least go, race matters in this conversation. Race has to be part of any kind of feminist conversation. For me, that's the magic of intersectionality, because it always brings us back to what's the lived experience of any woman of color anywhere in the globe, and actually, you know, how does that connect to her gender? And the other aspect of it is intersectionality does a thing, which is, this is not about piling oppression on top of oppression, because that's the other way that people struggle with it. It is about the intersection. It's not that. It's saying, it's actually saying there's this acute thing happening right there. What's the thing happening right there? And it allows us to attend to that. It allows us to articulate it. And for me, it creates a space to resist. And that is also the magic. Like, there's a thing that happens right there that has us go, this is where we are located and this is where we resist from. So the way I think about it is, I remember at the intersection, I imagine at the intersection, I dream at the intersection, I resist at the intersection, because the intersection is embodied here, right? So I'm not Black yesterday and you know, then woman tomorrow, and
Mhm.
you know, lesbian on this day here. It's all interwoven. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that for me is how I think about it. I don't know, Neha, if
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there's just one thing I want to add is that, I mean, if you remember that intersectionality emerged out of radical social justice movements, and intersectionality is about a fundamental relationship to power. I think it's probably easier for me to define intersectionality in terms of what it's not. And it's not a tick box exercise. It's not a one size fits all. There's no way to do intersectional work. It's about power. It's about privilege. It's about positionality. It's about discomfort. It's about messiness. And it's about interrogating all these structures, our own kind of complicity in keeping these structures going. And it was interesting, the thing you said. It's, yes, absolutely. It's not about piling up oppressions. And sometimes I wonder, because at least within the international development kind of arena, the way we what I've understood in terms of how intersectionality is now how it's being used. So you say, okay, so we understand that these women and women in sub-Saharan Africa, they're poor women, they're women working in rural agriculture, etc. And intersectionality is, then you say, okay, so she's poor, plus she's from sub-Saharan Africa, plus she's working in rural livelihoods. But that's not intersectionality. It's not, because then it's additive. But I guess what I'm trying to say, and maybe this part I'll ask Marianne to edit, but what I'm trying to say is that intersectionality is also about questioning why we imagine certain women in certain ways and in such narrow ways. You know, why do we always describe women in sub-Saharan Africa as poor? I mean, there are non-poor women also. It's how we have completely collapsed particular people to be equal to fit into these categories that serve us and our structures. So I think, yeah.
can I add something
please
to
add,
that?
Please add. Yeah.
I think for me there is something, and it's that, Neha. It's intersectionality allows us to decenter white womanhood, elite womanhood. You know, like it allows us to locate the center in the margins and work from that place. It's like, you know, when Audre Lorde spoke about us being the ones that survived, there is a value to recognizing that one of the products of colonization, for me as somebody who descended from enslaved peoples, was that we were brought to the Caribbean as work units. My ancestors were brought to the Caribbean as work units. Therefore, we were only ever imagined as work units and then dead. Now, there's something that's really useful for me to be reminded of that, and to go, actually, there's nothing wrong with, for me right now, resisting from the margins, because, and actually centering my work in the margins rather than centering my work around a singular version of white womanhood where I then am the other. So when we talk about woman, it's not me anybody's imagining with my Black Caribbean lesbian self, is somebody else, right? So for me, I'm like, this allows me to imagine and construct and design and remember and do all of those things. And if we talk about international development work, it also allows us to turn it on its head and go, who are we developing? What are we talking about? Actually, after we're done underdeveloped people's country, then we have the audacity to be talking about we're developing people. Like, come on. It allows us to mess it up. And as Neha says, it is untidy, and it is not about just going, and now I get to do more of my beneficiary dynamic where I tick a box and say, and now I've spoken to 5 Dalek women, tick.
Yes.
And I spoke to 5 disabled Dalek women, tick. Right? That's not what intersectionality is. And we can't, and people also think that they can talk about intersectionality and not acknowledge its Black feminist roots and not talk about race. You can't de-race this. This is ours. We own this one, right? So when people try and de-race it, I'm like, you're doing a diversity management exercise. Go and do your thing, but this is not. You're not doing intersectionality.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
See. So we ran. We probably ranted at you more than you had.
No, this is absolutely it. This is exactly why speaking to you is so valuable. But I'm just really struck by what both of you said about. There was two things. I think, Marai, you had said that as it becomes something that is more mainstream, as intersectionality is, let's say, adopted, I'll be polite, rather than co-opted, that your conversations and your interactions sometimes others will look and go, well, yes, black, but over here, so doesn't fit the narrative of the poor rural that Neha described. And I think that sense, you sort of putting that together with what you both shared around how this is difficult work, this isn't something that you can have a checklist for or a guidebook or whatever. This is about the lived experiences of individuals, and in any context every individual has a very different experience. So I'm just thinking about in terms of in an international context, and I think you've both touched on this in different ways, but in working in an international context to support global struggles, how does intersectionality shape how you practice the work? Given that it's complicated and messy and challenging, how then does it help to shape what you do?
So I guess for Neha and I have been thinking about this because, like, for me, this is an interesting one in the sense that we see ourselves as part of intersecting global struggles rather than supporting global struggles. Mm-hmm. So we are both women of the South, located in the North, living on these islands, doing what we do, but for me, it's not as tidy. Neither of us are coming from that place of parachuting to India or the Caribbean or Africa to kind of help out the poor folk. And so I think that even the thing of supporting, for us, positionality matters. I think, would you say, Neha? I think that's one of the things. And so I guess for me, I think of so if I'm in Jamaica, mm-hmm. Where my parents are from and where I was raised, there are a different set of things that happen in terms of my experiences. And then when I'm here, there are a different set of things that happen. And for me, I'm always having to connect the dots. Stuart Hall's autobiography, Life Between Two Islands, really captures this beautifully. Like, if you happen to embody the thing, so if you're not doing intersectionality as an intellectual exercise, but you're living an intersectional life and you're also working to disrupt your own privilege while actually recognizing the points when you are subjugated and when you experience being powerless, then it demands something different of you. It demands that you are reflexive, and it demands that you're able to live with your own vulnerability. It calls you into a place of solidarity in a very different way. It also calls on you to not go into denial about your own privilege. And this is actually, for Neha and I, this is a real place where I think we've probably both, in our different ways, cried together, even about, understanding that I know that when I'm in Jamaica, I get treated a certain way because of the color of my skin and because I come from a rural middle-class family. And that has afforded me a set of protections in different instances that there is no point I pretend that I don't have. And so it's actually the moving between those two things that for me has me see myself as necessarily part of the change, not just as oppressed, but also as someone who can hold privilege and who also has access. And as someone who's educated in a certain way and so forth. And then here, what I'm dealing with all the time is everything from the microaggressions to the exclusions to whatever the thing is. So I guess it's complicated. Neha, please help.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's complicated. It is really complicated. And I think about when being located here in London, and when I speak to colleagues back in India, I sometimes sense a hint of disappointment because I'm not white, but I'm operating in an international NGO which is based in London, and that's difficult, and it's complicated. So it's these questions of how you build solidarity, with whom you build solidarity, how these ruptures keep coming up in places that you don't assume or you never thought that they would. What it means to live your life across two continents with two very different contexts, but also very different experiences of privilege and power. And yeah, so you said it really well, Marai. I have nothing more to add. It's just messy and painful. I think painful is definitely,
Yeah.
Absolutely understood.
Sorry, go ahead. Can I say a really quick thing, which is I see myself as part of the transformative process. So I see myself again as somebody who has descended from enslaved people. I see myself as necessarily part of creating change, and so there's the learning and there's the unlearning. There's the dealing with the pain that Neha spoke about, and that I know is there for me. There are ruptures all the time, and there's a way that we don't get the luxury of escaping and looking at this from this weird distance. And one of the things I appreciate about working with Neha is the straight up, this is who I am in the work. Let me not pretend, right? And I think that kind of social science and research history in this country, in the European context, has really pushed us to imagine ourselves not there. We're doing ethnographic work and like we're not there. And part of us decolonizing our own practice is to say we're here. This like I'm invested in this liberation because my life depends on this. Yes. My emotional, my psychic, my physical life at different points in time depends on this. And so for us, it's actually that we embody the work, and that is a difficult position to hold. And so when people ask me about what they need to think about, I'm like, well, what are you embodying? And like, what are you carrying, and what are you bringing to the work? Because if you're not bringing yourself, or because you're always bringing yourself, if you're not actually going to tell the truth about it, then I take issue with that. I'm not going to tell you not to do the work, because I don't have the right to do that. But I question where you are in the work. We are ever always there, always. So it helps if we tell the truth about being there.
Yeah. And also, sorry, Maya, just to jump in and say that we're always where we're at, and it's always a journey. Like we didn't come. I'm not this finished product, and I never will be. And I've changed so much in the last 10 years that I've been in this sector. If I think of, when I started this work, it was through social work school, which means particular things, which comes from a particular perspective. And I look at things I did or ways I saw the world, and I cringe today, 12 years later. I'm just like, ooh, how? And that's been a journey. And I, yeah, so probably not to, yeah. It's a journey.
Yeah.
I think what you both speak of is almost kind of navigating a space which, because of who you and we, who we are, requires you to be really, really self-aware, reflective, but also able to articulate the right thing at the right time in the right group. And so, you're also not just managing, I guess, yourselves, but you're also having to manage these quite complex contexts, which you have to do to be able to kind of, lead on, share your lived experiences, and do that disruptive work that you do, which for yourselves must be incredibly exhausting, for want of a better word, because it's 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Yeah. I think it's definitely exhausting, but it's also rich and joyful. And, when Alice Walker said resistance is a secret of joy, there is like, I exist to resist. So, there's like, one part of me is gonna, and I'm a Leo with a Gemini rising, right? So one part of me is gonna be like, yeah, I'm knackered. And another part of me is gonna be like, yeah, but let's get in there. Because, I come from a rich tradition of people who dance through struggle, right? And there is something, we sing and dance when people are born and when people die and when people at weddings and like everything. And there is something about that tradition that is really woven into who I am. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but I have a tattoo on my arm, which is 7 spirals, which is about 7 generations. And for me, I see myself as benefiting from 7 generations of resistance, and see myself as accountable 7 generations at least into the future. And for me, if I engage with that accountability, then, it means that I then think about collective care and not just a conversation about self-care. It means that I think about actually, what do I need to do to bring joy into this moment? And it means that I allow myself to cry, but also means I allow myself to laugh, and I allow myself to be frustrated, and I allow myself my humanity, because one of the things around colonization is the thing that was denied to my people was our humanity. And so for me, I reserve the right to be human. And with that, it's messed up, it's fallible, it's all of those things. And then I get up tomorrow morning and do it all over again anyway. So
yeah. But just because you mentioned about, sort of earlier in the conversation, you talked about decolonizing, and you've just mentioned, sort of the role that, colonization, colonialism played in pretty much most of the global south. So, sort of in terms of, sorry, I'm going to fluff this. Right. So when you talk about decolonizing, what does it mean to decolonize development?
Neha, do you want to start with this one?
Yes, sorry,
do you want me to start?
Listen,
well, I can go.
You know that I'm gonna cuss my way through that bit. So let's do the.
That's fine. That's also
Neha,
very strongly encouraged.
Neha has a better way of saying things.
Oh, do I? Okay. Anyway, I mean, this is long. How do you decolonize development? I think by starting with recognizing where the idea of development came from, what the roots of the term, the concept are, how racialized it is, how it maps onto the same kind of east-west binaries that colonization used to say that the West was more advanced, the East was backward, barbaric, etc., etc. Start from there and then continue into the 2 world wars, the international financial institutions, why they were set up, who they were set up to benefit, what structural adjustment did to developing countries, and recognize that underdevelopment did not happen out of nowhere. It was a process that systematically it was engineered by the North. It continues till this date. Yeah, and with that, then let's talk, and then and I'm sure Mara will talk more about this, but then we need to look at international development through a lens of reparation and not through rescue, and how do we begin that conversation? That's I guess one starting point, but also, Mara, do you want to come in at this point? And
I'll say something. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. So the wealth that the North holds, the kind of the wealth, the power, it's not neutral and it's not accidental. And I think that that's critical. There is a way that we engage with it as if somehow this homogenous entity, by the way, that is the global South, this homogenous thing, that somehow people, that where people's countries might be economically, while we're constantly exploiting those countries still, somehow is something to do with people's capability, or something to do with, some great mystical thing that happened where some people were just like wealthy and powerful and other people, no. This is, as Neha says, this is systematic. It's happened over extended period of time, and it's happening today. And so I am disturbed by how little in international development spaces we engage with colonization. Like it's one of the most illogical things for me that people go to London School of Economics. I'm not picking on London School of Economics. Well, I might be a little bit. But people go to LSE. They do courses on, master's programs in international development. They fly to somewhere in the global South, having gotten a job at a big INGO. And they're experts in the global South, and they never have to engage with how they have benefited, how the fact that they actually are here to do this work is a direct result of centuries of oppression of peoples of the South. And I think that for me, international development needs to be called something else. And the whole construct needs to be absolutely, as Neha said, reframed. And rather than aid, whatever that is, and whatever, all that stuff, if we started to think about reparation, right, what would that actually look like? When I say to people that when slavery was abolished in the Caribbean, payments were made to people that owned my ancestors. No payments have ever been made to the people of the Caribbean. None, right? And so if we start by then, if we look at Haiti and we think about the debt that France imposed on Haiti because Haiti had, enslaved people had the audacity to revolt, right? If we look at like all of this is constructed, and then we think of Haiti and what we think about is poverty. And I look at Haiti and what I think about is revolutionary spirit. And I think that it's really, like that for me speaks to why the foundation of this work is flawed. And so for me, if you want to do international development work, start from somewhere else. Yeah, maybe, like Gayatri Spivak, speaks about ancestral debt. I would love Europeans to start to engage with the idea of ancestral debt. To who do I owe my very life?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I say this as somebody who also has European ancestors. Complicated thing.
But I think again, sort of, thinking back several hundred years to, slavery, I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm not that young. But I think very much to my formative years were growing up in countries which were going through independence struggles in Southern Africa. And, you know, I remember that very vividly. And I remember living as a Black child through, you know, with the implications of what that meant. So it is this thing about, you know, whether it is sort of almost seared into the DNA of communities or whether it's through recent experience, the lack of acknowledgement of what that means in the context of developmental aid always for me doesn't make any sense. And it suggests that it's all a little bit, you know, sort of scratching at the surface rather than actually really dealing with the root issues.
Yeah. If we look at militarization, you know, we have conversations here about conflicts in the global south as if those conflicts just emerged. You know, yes, there may be tensions between communities and who arms those communities and who arms those communities with what, you know, and to what extent do those tensions even connect to legacies of colonization. You know, we're now in conversations about environmental justice, climate justice, you know, while we continue to see the occupation of indigenous land and why we don't acknowledge. It's easier for us to imagine a very well-meaning, no disrespect to the young woman, it's easier for us to imagine a young white woman in Europe, you know, as the kind of hero of climate justice than for us to acknowledge, you know, a Black African woman, you know, for us to acknowledge a Maori woman, for us to acknowledge a woman in a Pacific island, you know, where the islands are sinking because of the damage that we've done. You know, it's easy for us to imagine her as the savior than for us to imagine, you know, something which is actually about the struggles that Black women of color have engaged in for decades to protect the land, because the land is us, you know? And so those, even how conversations that are meant to be positive conversations, like climate justice conversations, are so racialized.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Yeah. You know, we start to talk about population control. It's not going to be white people up here, you know, thinking about population control. They're going to be telling, you know, or communities to stop having babies.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, absolutely. You know, I think saying these out loud is exactly why you're here, both of you. But I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm thinking if I go I've got sort of the last of your questions, but I'm going to combine it because I think if you were asked almost what 3 pieces of advice you would share with the international aid sector, and I'm saying that in inverted commas, to help them better understand what is meant by intersectionality, particularly in the, you know, in working on violence against women and girls, what 3 pieces of advice would you give? You can give 7, but just to give you a sense of kind of, you know, some easy, not easy to do, but some kind of headline things that they would be able to take on board and start exploring as part of their work to make it more meaningful.
Neha?
Yeah, I've got more than 3. But
maybe no 7, let's just say, but yes, go
okay,
ahead.
no more than 7. I think they're definitely not pieces of advice, but they are things to think about. I think a lot of INGOs are now decentralizing their structures and moving their headquarters, or HQs as they're called, to the Global South, which is great. But I think one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, within these headquarters, who is employed? What is the caste, class, gender, sexuality makeup of the employees? Who are on permanent contracts? Who gets paid how much? There is in India, and we routinely refer to the young men and women who do the bulk of the field work as field workers, and how are they valued, treated, paid, how much are they involved in core decision making. And these are activists without whom organizations would not exist, but they are very rarely on boards of organizations or trustees or paid permanent employees. That's one thing. I think closer home within INGOs in the north, there is a move now to have, at least for people of color, to come together and talk about what it means to be who we are within these organizations. But I think I think white people need to get together and start having these difficult conversations themselves, start talking about their racism and how it impacts people like me. I don't think all the work has to be done by us coming together and constantly talking. I think there's a huge role for white people to build their tolerance for discomfort, to start doing the work that we do, that we just have to do to survive. We don't have a choice. We just do this to survive. And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen. I think we need to think about language, the beneficiary language, the going on a mission, the being deployed to go somewhere, being deployed to go to the field. I think about how we reinforce power and harm through language. The number of times I like recoil when I hear people speak like this without thinking about why we use this language and how powerful it is and how it can, I mean, apart from hurt, it does so much damage. And this is, I guess, linked to my final point about thinking about why we're doing this work and how we position ourselves within this work. Because if you haven't thought about that, then I think the default is to think about you're going from here to over there to help them. And it ties into what assumptions we have about the people we work with, how they play out. We seem to be so comfortable with, for example, the images we have of young women and girls from the global south splattered all across our offices and, I don't know, screensavers, etc., etc. I mean, can we even begin thinking of what if it was the other way around? Would we like pictures of ourselves in other people's offices back in India? No, we wouldn't. So how can we dehumanize in the way that we do? How are we reducing people to objects? And honestly, I really think that what a good thing to do is think everything you do, if you think about it, think about whether it would be possible the other way around. Would young researchers from India be able to come in here and go to people's home and ask them incredibly personal questions in 3 days and leave and write a report on them and then have authority to talk about what they think is wrong with this population? No, that wouldn't be allowed. So why do we think that it's admissible? And if we think it's okay, then that's where we start thinking about why we think it's okay. But yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. I can really go on. But
that was brilliant.
I love it so much. So I'll add a couple of things. So the first thing to say is just to reiterate that thing that Neha said, like for many of us, we're going to do this anyway. We're going to do this whether it's cool or not, whether people like the language of intersectionality or not. Like I saw a young woman with a t-shirt the other day saying, I'm not here for the coin, I'm here for the change, right? So, like in our sector here in, this United Kingdom, we were doing BME social justice work, Black women's social justice work, Black feminist labor before it became a thing. Before the movement became a sector. And many of us will continue to do this because our collective liberation is bound up with this work. And I think if the international development sector, if individuals working in the sector started to think about this as, to what extent are you as Neha said, reinforcing, or to what extent are you willing to disrupt? And to what extent are you willing to disrupt at a deeply personal level? So when you fly to Papua New Guinea and actually you spend your evenings at the yacht club, and you've got a woman who comes and cleans your house, and you've got 3 security guards driving you around, and then you come back and you're wearing clothes made from fabric from the Pacific Islands, and you're speaking 3 different languages because, bruv, you had time to do that, right? What does that say about who you are? That you have swallowed us up once again, and you swallow us up and you speak us as it feels like, and you can then retreat to the place of your whiteness. If people start to do work around their whiteness in international development work, it would be incredibly helpful. It'd be a good start, because we're constantly doing this labor. Like, we are doing the emotional, the practical, the physical, the psychic labor. We're always on the damn plantation. We're always, and I don't say that lightly. Like, the dynamic of the plantation is not simply a metaphor based on what has been. It's actually, the plantation for me is ideological, it's intellectual, and it persists, and it persists because actually the power structures that constructed the plantation in the first place have remained intact. As when Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, and he was talking to us. But there is also something for me about white people leaving the slave ship and white people leaving the plantation and actually paying back, like engaging in reparations. And that people might think it's bigger than them, but as an individual, you either invest in maintaining the status quo or you disrupt the status quo. And privilege, if we don't give something up, that thing that Neha said about discomfort, like, I'm like, what's the fear about doing this? Like, I am so tired of dealing with white fragility. Like, I will no longer hand tissue to white people who are crying white tears, because I'm like, seriously, I don't have shoulders enough breasts to actually nurture anymore. Like, I'm done. And I'm done because we have always done that. And now I'm like, I'm going to do what we need to do for us. I will bring my body to actually work with you in solidarity along your journey, but I'm not here to teach you how to sort yourself out. I want you to do that work and bring yourself as an ally, as a comrade. I don't want your charity. I want your solidarity. And if you don't bring it, I'm going to do what I'm doing anyway. And if you think I'm an angry Black woman, then that's probably a really good assessment, because there's stuff to be angry about.
I hear that. Absolutely hear that. And I think the charity, you're here for solidarity. You'll go for solidarity, not charity. I think is such a brilliant way to encapsulate that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking on that note, I think that's been really brilliant, but I don't want us to go if there's anything else that you think, oh, I wish I'd said that. Please take the opportunity now.
I think, sorry, I'm going to jump in here just on the last thing Marai said about charity and not solidarity. And I think so why this work is here and within is because this can become another thing where people start using the language, you're working in solidarity with organizations in the global south, but being an ally is not an identity. Being an ally is a process, and being an ally is affirmed by the people you are allied with. It's not something you self-proclaim. Yes. And I think you have to really, it's work, it's hard work. And I think people need to be prepared for that kind of work. It's not another tick box of, I work in solidarity with other people.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Because it can end up becoming a thing. It can
like
end up
intersectionality
becoming
has, right?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, INGOs need to not just imagine themselves out of business, they need to start working towards being out of business.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like, what, there is, because we have this Victorian model, right? That actually is really very much about how you do charity stuff. And for me, there is something around, we're still operating with this Victorian model. You know, that's you know, this neo-colonial model. And I think actually there is, if INGOs can start to work towards not being there, you know, then that would be really helpful for me, because this whole idea of being the filter, you know, like being the umbrella, being the thing that then is dispersing people and money and all of those things. I'm like, what are you doing? Why? You know, so even that, like, very practical things around what a transformative approach would look like, for me, that would be incredibly useful. And but also, this work is personal. You should be taking it personally. It is always personal. And where are you in the work? Always, like, who are you? What are you doing? What are you there for? Did you see something with some poor child in Ethiopia when you were 12 and decide that that's what you wanted to do? Can you stop rescuing us, please? Because actually, this is not the conversation. Right now, do something that is about you bringing your body, your psyche, etc., to actually work shoulder to shoulder if necessary, but always from a place of not expecting any gratitude from us. Because allyship also doesn't come with this thing of, and the people that I'm being allied to should, no.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
So
Brilliant. So, Marai and Neha, thank you so much for being so very generous with your whole selves. I think that really added to the conversation. It's been a real pleasure. I think, you know, I feel completely part of the struggles that you are immersed in all day, every day. And I just feel really privileged to have been able to have this conversation with you. So thank you to you both. And here's, as we say in Southern Africa, a luta continua.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Ponzo, thank you for being in this conversation with us. And it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a little bit of an orchestra, like a band with all different elements to it, which is a beautiful thing. So thank you for bringing you to the conversation and for who you are and what you do, you know. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank
my
you.
sister Neha, always shoulder to shoulder.
Thank you. Thanks, Ponzo. We haven't met, but I hope we do sometime soon.
You've been listening to Ponzo Mafete in conversation with Marai Larasi and Neha Kagal, and this is Healing Solidarity, Embodying Change, the second conference about reimagining international development. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. If you'd like to spend a bit more time with the ideas, suggestions and themes discussed in this talk or any of the others in the conference, don't forget you can make a contribution to support the production of this conference and get access to recordings and resources that will help you go deeper with these themes and ideas. Just click the link below this video to find out more.